Hello everyone, welcome back to NightScaryDream. Before we dive into the next part of our terrifying tale, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and get comfy. It's time to continue the story. As they turned a corner, Max grabbed Emily's arm, pulling her into a narrow alleyway. "Wait," he whispered, his eyes locked on hers. "Do you hear that?" Emily listened, her ears straining to pick up any sound. And then she heard it. The sound of footsteps, echoing off the buildings. They were being followed. As they listened to the footsteps, Emily's heart sank. They had been so careful, but somehow they had been found. "What do we do?" Emily whispered, her eyes locked on Max. Max hesitated, his eyes darting back and forth. "I don't know," he said finally. "But we can't stay here." As they turned to leave, Emily heard the footsteps getting closer. They were running out of time. Suddenly, Max grabbed Emily's arm and pulled her into a nearby doorway. They hid behind a stack of crates, holding their breath as the footsteps approached. As the footsteps stopped right outside their hiding spot, Emily's heart was racing. She was sure they had been found. But then, the footsteps started again, moving away from their hiding spot. Emily let out a sigh of relief as she realized they had narrowly escaped detection. As they waited until the coast was clear, Emily turned to Max with a questioning look. "Who was that?" she asked. Max shook his head. "I don't know," he said. "But I think we should get out of here. Now." As they emerged from their hiding spot, Emily saw that they were in a part of town she didn't recognize. The buildings were taller and more run-down than the ones in her neighborhood. "Where are we?" Emily asked, looking around. Max hesitated, his eyes darting back and forth. "I'm not sure," he said finally. "But I think we're close to the waterfront." As they walked, Emily saw that Max was right. They were getting closer to the waterfront. She could smell the salt water and hear the seagulls crying overhead. But as they turned a corner, Emily saw something that made her heart sink. A group of people were standing on the dock, looking out at the water. And among them was a figure Emily recognized. It was Marcus, the leader of the community. And he was staring straight at her. Emily's heart sank as she saw Marcus staring at her. She knew that she had to get out of there fast. "Max, we have to go," Emily whispered, tugging on his arm. But Max didn't move. He was frozen in place, staring at Marcus with a look of shock on his face. "Max, come on," Emily urged, trying to pull him away. But Max still didn't move. He was transfixed by Marcus, and Emily could see the fear in his eyes. Suddenly, Marcus started to walk towards them, a smile spreading across his face. "Emily," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "I've been looking for you." Emily's heart was racing as she backed away from Marcus, pulling Max with her. "You'll never take me alive," Emily spat, trying to sound braver than she felt. Marcus laughed. "We'll see about that," he said, his eyes glinting with amusement. As Marcus reached out to grab her, Emily knew that she had to think fast. She looked around, desperate for an escape route. And then she saw it. A small boat bobbing in the water. It was their only chance. "Max, come on," Emily shouted, pulling him towards the boat. They sprinted down the dock, Marcus and his followers hot on their heels. Emily could hear their footsteps pounding behind her, and she knew that they were running out of time. As they reached the boat, Emily leapt aboard, pulling Max with her. They pushed off from the dock, and the boat drifted out into the water. As they looked back at the dock, Emily saw Marcus standing there, his eyes blazing with anger. "You'll pay for this," he shouted, his voice carrying across the water. Emily smiled, feeling a sense of triumph. They had escaped. But as they sailed away from the dock, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She looked around but saw nothing. And then she heard a faint noise. A splashing sound coming from the water. Emily's heart sank as she realized that they were not alone. Something was in the water, and it was coming for them. As the splashing sound grew louder, Emily's eyes scanned the water, trying to see what was making the noise. Max was sitting next to her, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "What is that?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling with fear. Max turned to her, his eyes narrowing. "I don't know," he said. "But I think we should get out of here." As they turned the boat around, Emily saw a fin slicing through the water. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized that it was a shark. "Oh my God!" Emily breathed, her eyes fixed on the fin. Max grabbed the oars and started to row, trying to get them away from the shark. But it was too late. The shark was closing in. As the shark attacked the boat, Emily screamed, her voice echoing across the water. Max was trying to fight off the shark, but it was too powerful. Just when it seemed like all was lost, Emily saw a figure jumping into the water. It was a woman with a spear gun in her hand. The woman swam towards the shark, her eyes fixed on her target. She fired the spear gun, and the shark let out a loud screech as it was hit. As the shark swam away, injured, the woman turned to Emily and Max. "You're safe now," she said, smiling. Emily and Max stared at the woman in shock, unsure of what to say. Who was she? And how had she saved them? As they sailed away from the shark, Emily turned to the woman. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. The woman smiled. "My name is Ava," she said, "and I've been watching you. I know what you're going through." Emily's eyes narrowed. What did Ava mean? What did she know? As they sailed on, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that Ava was hiding something. But she was also their only hope. As they sailed on, Ava told them about herself. She was a former marine biologist who had been studying the effects of the virus on the ocean's ecosystem. She had been living on a small island, conducting her research and trying to stay safe. But as Emily listened to Ava's story, she couldn't shake the feeling that Ava was leaving something out. There was something about Ava's story that didn't add up. As they approached the island, Emily saw that it was small and uninhabited. There were no buildings, no signs of life. Just sand, rocks, and palm trees. "Where's your lab?" Emily asked Ava, looking around. Ava smiled. "It's hidden," she said. "I had to be careful. There are people who would love to get their hands on my research." As they walked across the island, Ava led them to a small cave. Inside, Emily saw a makeshift lab, filled with equipment and samples. Ava started to explain her research, showing them the samples and data she had collected. Emily was fascinated, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Ava was still hiding something. As they looked at the data, Max suddenly spoke up. "Ava, can I ask you something?" he said. Ava turned to him. "Of course, Max. What is it?" Max hesitated. "How do you know so much about the virus? You seem to know more than anyone I've ever met." Ava's smile faltered for a moment, and Emily saw a flash of something in her eyes. "Fear? Guilt? I've just been studying it for a long time," Ava said finally. "I've dedicated my life to understanding the virus." But Emily wasn't convinced. She was starting to suspect that Ava was more involved in the virus than she was letting on. As they left the lab and walked back to the boat, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that Ava was hiding something big, and she was determined to find out what it was. As they sailed away from the island, Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. She didn't trust Ava, and she couldn't shake the feeling that Ava was hiding something. Max seemed to sense her unease, and he leaned over to whisper in her ear. "What's wrong?" he asked. Emily hesitated, unsure of how to articulate her concerns. "I don't trust Ava," she said finally. Max's eyes narrowed. "Why not?" he asked. Emily shrugged. "I don't know. She just seems off. And she knows an awful lot about the virus." Max nodded thoughtfully. "I see what you mean," he said. "But maybe she's just really smart." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Maybe," she said. "But I still don't trust her." As they sailed on, Emily kept a close eye on Ava. She watched as Ava expertly navigated the boat, her eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of danger. But despite Ava's obvious skills, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that Ava was hiding something, and she was determined to find out what it was. As the sun began to set, Ava steered the boat towards a small cove. "We'll spend the night here," she said, smiling. Emily nodded, her eyes scanning the cove. It was a beautiful spot, surrounded by towering cliffs and crystal-clear water. But as they settled in for the night, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She kept looking over her shoulder, expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. And then, just as she was starting to drift off to sleep, Emily heard a faint noise. It was a rustling sound, coming from the cliffs above. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she sat up, her eyes scanning the cliffs. And then she saw it. A figure lurking in the shadows. Emily's heart was racing as she stared at the figure. She couldn't make out any features, but she could sense that it was watching them. She nudged Max awake, her eyes fixed on the figure. "Max, wake up!" she whispered urgently. Max rubbed his eyes, looking around groggily. And then he saw the figure too. "What is that?" Max whispered, his voice trembling slightly. Ava was already on her feet, her eyes fixed on the figure. "I don't know," she said quietly, "but I think we should get out of here." As they quickly gathered their belongings, Emily couldn't help but wonder if they had stumbled into something much bigger than they had anticipated. The figure didn't move as they sailed away from the cove, but Emily could sense its eyes on them, watching them as they disappeared into the darkness. As they sailed on, the silence between them was oppressive. Emily knew that they had to talk about what they had just seen, but she didn't know where to start. Finally, Max broke the silence. "What was that thing?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ava hesitated before answering. "I don't know," she said, "but I think it might be connected to the virus." Emily's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" she asked. Ava took a deep breath before answering. "I've been studying the virus for months now," she said, "and I think I might have stumbled upon something big." As Ava paused, Emily felt a sense of trepidation. What had Ava discovered? And why was she being so secretive? But before Ava could continue, a loud noise echoed through the night air. It was the sound of engines, growing louder by the second. As they looked around, Emily saw a fleet of boats approaching them. They were surrounded, and Emily had a feeling that their lives were about to change forever. As the boats drew closer, Emily saw that they were filled with people, all of whom were staring at her and Max with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Ava stood up, her eyes scanning the boats. "What do you want?" she called out to the people on the boats. A figure stood up on one of the boats, a tall, imposing man with a stern expression. "We've been tracking you," he said, his voice booming across the water. "We know what you're carrying." Emily's heart skipped a beat as she realized what the man was talking about. The vials of blood, the research that Ava had been conducting, it was all too much to coincidence. "What do you want with us?" Ava asked, her voice firm. The man smiled, a cold, calculating smile. "We want to take you in," he said. "We want to study you." As the man's words hung in the air, Emily felt a chill run down her spine. She knew that they couldn't let these people take them. They had to escape. But as she looked around, Emily realized that they were surrounded. There was no way out. The man's smile grew wider as he saw the fear in Emily's eyes. "You can't escape," he said. "You're coming with us." As the people on the boats began to close in, Emily knew that they had to think fast. They had to come up with a plan, and they had to come up with it now. But as she looked at Max and Ava, Emily realized that they were all thinking the same thing. They were all thinking that they were trapped, and that there was no way out. As the people on the boats closed in, Emily felt a sense of desperation wash over her. They were trapped, and they were running out of time. But then Ava suddenly stood up, a fierce look in her eyes. "We're not going down without a fight," she said, her voice ringing out across the water. Max and Emily exchanged a look, and then they stood up, ready to face whatever was coming their way. The people on the boats were armed, but Ava was not intimidated. She pulled out a small device from her pocket and pressed a button, and suddenly the water around them began to churn and foam. Ava had activated some kind of underwater defense system, and it was working to drive the boats back. As the people on the boats struggled to regain control, Emily, Max, and Ava took advantage of the distraction to make their escape. They jumped into the water, swimming as fast as they could away from the boats. Ava led the way, using her knowledge of the underwater terrain to navigate them through the choppy waters. As they swam, Emily could feel the adrenaline pumping through her veins. They were fighting for their lives, and they were determined to win. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the shore, exhausted but exhilarated. They collapsed onto the sand, panting and trembling with fear. But as they looked at each other, Emily knew that they had made it through the worst of it. They had escaped and they were alive. But as they caught their breath, Emily realized that they were not alone. There was someone watching them from the shadows, someone who had been waiting for them all along. And as Emily turned to face the stranger, she knew that their adventure was far from over. As the people on the boats closed in, Emily felt a sense of desperation wash over her. They were trapped, and they were running out of time. But then Ava suddenly stood up, a fierce look in her eyes. "We're not going down without a fight," she said, her voice ringing out across the water. Max and Emily exchanged a look, and then they stood up, ready to face whatever was coming their way. The people on the boats were armed, but Ava was not intimidated. She pulled out a small device from her pocket and pressed a button, and suddenly the water around them began to churn and foam. Ava had activated some kind of underwater defense system, and it was working to drive the boats back. As the people on the boats struggled to regain control, Emily, Max, and Ava took advantage of the distraction to make their escape. They jumped into the water, swimming as fast as they could away from the boats. Ava led the way, using her knowledge of the underwater terrain to navigate them through the choppy waters. As they swam, Emily could feel the adrenaline pumping through her veins. They were fighting for their lives, and they were determined to win. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the shore, exhausted but exhilarated. They collapsed onto the sand, panting and trembling with fear. But as they looked at each other, Emily knew that they had made it through the worst of it. They had escaped, and they were alive. But as they caught their breath, Emily realized that they were not alone. There was someone watching them from the shadows, someone who had been waiting for them all along. And as Emily turned to face the stranger, she knew that their adventure was far from over. Continue. Here is the continuation of the story. As Emily turned to face the stranger, she saw a figure emerging from the shadows. It was a woman with long, curly hair and piercing green eyes. She was dressed in a black leather jacket and carrying a large backpack. "Who are you?" Emily asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "My name is Samantha," the woman replied, her eyes scanning the group. "And I've been sent to help you." Ava raised an eyebrow. "Sent by who?" she asked. Samantha smiled. "Let's just say that I have friends in high places," she said. "Friends who are very interested in your research, Ava." Ava's eyes narrowed. "What do you know about my research?" she asked. Samantha pulled out a small device from her backpack and handed it to Ava. "I know that you've been studying the virus," she said, "and I know that you've made some significant breakthroughs." Ava's eyes widened as she took the device. "How did you get this?" she asked. Samantha smiled. "Like I said, I have friends in high places," she said. "Friends who are willing to help us stop the virus once and for all." As Samantha spoke, Emily felt a surge of hope. Could it be true? Could they really stop the virus? But as she looked at Ava, she saw a skeptical expression on her face. Ava didn't trust Samantha, and Emily wasn't sure if she should either. "What's in it for you?" Ava asked, her eyes narrowing. Samantha smiled. "Let's just say that I have a personal stake in stopping the virus," she said. "A stake that goes beyond just saving humanity." As Samantha spoke, Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. What did Samantha mean? And what secrets was she hiding? As Samantha finished speaking, Emily noticed that Max was staring at her with a curious expression. "What's going on, Max?" Emily asked. Max hesitated before speaking. "I think I know who Samantha is," he said. "Or at least, I think I know who she might be related to." Ava's eyes widened as she took the device. "How did you get this?" she asked. Samantha smiled. "Like I said, I have friends in high places," she said. "Friends who are willing to help us stop the virus once and for all." As Samantha spoke, Emily felt a surge of hope. Could it be true? Could they really stop the virus? But as she looked at Ava, she saw a skeptical expression on her face. Ava didn't trust Samantha, and Emily wasn't sure if she should either. "What's in it for you?" Ava asked, her eyes narrowing. Samantha smiled. "Let's just say that I have a personal stake in stopping the virus," she said. "A stake that goes beyond just saving humanity." As Samantha spoke, Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. What did Samantha mean? And what secrets was she hiding? As Samantha finished speaking, Emily noticed that Max was staring at her with a curious expression. "What's going on, Max?" Emily asked. Max hesitated before speaking. "I think I know who Samantha is," he said. "Or at least, I think I know who she might be related to." Ava's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about, Max?" she asked. Max took a deep breath before speaking. "I think Samantha might be related to Dr. Kim," he said. "The scientist who created the virus." Emily's eyes widened in shock. "What?" she exclaimed. "How is that possible?" Samantha's expression was calm, but Emily could see a hint of sadness in her eyes. "Dr. Kim was my mother," she said, "and I've been trying to make up for her mistakes ever since." As Samantha spoke, Emily felt a mix of emotions. She was shocked by the revelation, but she was also curious. What did Samantha mean by making up for her mother's mistakes? Ava's expression was skeptical. "How can we trust you?" she asked. "Your mother created the virus that's been killing people." Samantha's eyes flashed with anger, but she quickly composed herself. "I know what my mother did," she said, "and I'm trying to make it right. I have information that can help you stop the virus. Are you willing to listen?" Ava hesitated, clearly unsure of what to do. But Emily could see the curiosity in her eyes. She wanted to know what Samantha had to say. "Okay, we'll listen," Ava said finally. "But if we don't like what we hear, we're leaving." Samantha nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "Fair enough," she said. "Let's get started." As Samantha began to explain, Emily listened intently. Samantha told them about her mother's research, about the virus that had been created to cure cancer, but had ended up killing millions instead. She told them about the mistakes that had been made, about the warnings that had been ignored. And she told them about the solution that she had found, the way to stop the virus once and for all. As Emily listened, she felt a sense of hope that she hadn't felt in months. Could it be true? Could they really stop the virus? But as she looked at Ava, she saw a skeptical expression on her face. Ava didn't believe Samantha, and Emily wasn't sure if she should either. As Samantha finished speaking, Ava stood up. "We need to talk about this," she said. "In private." Samantha nodded, a look of understanding on her face. "I'll wait here," she said. As Ava, Max, and Emily walked away, Emily couldn't help but wonder what they would decide. Would they trust Samantha and her solution, or would they go it alone? The fate of humanity rested on their decision, and Emily knew that they had to get it right. As they walked away from Samantha, Ava turned to Emily and Max. "What do you guys think?" she asked, her voice low. Emily hesitated. "I don't know," she said. "Part of me wants to trust her, but another part of me is screaming to be cautious." Max nodded in agreement. "I feel the same way," he said. "But we have to consider the possibility that she's telling the truth." Ava sighed. "I know," she said. "But what if she's not? What if this is all some kind of trap?" As they stood there, weighing their options, Emily suddenly had an idea. "Wait a minute," she said. "I think I know how we can test her." Ava and Max looked at her curiously. "How?" Ava asked. Emily smiled. "We can ask her to take us to her lab," she said. "If she's really working on a cure, she should be willing to show us her research." Ava's eyes narrowed. "That's a good idea," she said. "But what if she's not willing to take us to her lab?" Emily shrugged. "Then we'll know that she's not trustworthy," she said. As they walked back to Samantha, Emily felt a sense of determination. They were going to get to the bottom of this, no matter what it took. "Okay, Samantha," Ava said, her voice firm. "We've talked it over, and we're willing to listen to you. But we need to see some proof." Samantha smiled, a look of relief on her face. "I expected as much," she said. "Follow me." As they followed Samantha, Emily couldn't help but wonder what they would find. Would Samantha's lab be a legitimate research facility, or would it be something more sinister? As they followed Samantha, Emily noticed that they were heading towards a large, nondescript building on the outskirts of the city. The building looked abandoned, but Samantha led them to a small entrance on the side. She swiped a keycard and punched in a code, and the door swung open. "Welcome to my lab," she said, gesturing for them to enter. As they stepped inside, Emily's eyes widened in amazement. The lab was state-of-the-art, filled with rows of workstations, microscopes, and other equipment. There were also several large freezers humming in the corner, labeled with biohazard symbols. Samantha led them to a large workstation in the center of the room, where several petri dishes and test tubes were arranged. "This is where I've been working on the cure," she said, picking up a test tube filled with a clear liquid. As Emily watched, Samantha carefully poured the liquid into a petri dish, where it began to react with a sample of the virus. Within seconds, the virus began to break down, its structure disintegrating. "It's working," Max breathed, his eyes wide with excitement. Ava nodded, a small smile on her face. "This is incredible," she said. "But how does it work?" Samantha smiled, clearly proud of her work. "The liquid is a custom-designed enzyme that breaks down the virus's protein coat," she explained. "It's completely harmless to humans but deadly to the virus." As Emily listened, she felt a sense of hope that she hadn't felt in months. Could this really be the cure they had been searching for? But just as she was about to ask another question, Emily heard a loud noise coming from outside the lab. It sounded like footsteps, heavy and deliberate. Samantha's eyes flicked towards the door, a look of concern on her face. "What was that?" she whispered. As they stood there, frozen in uncertainty, the door to the lab suddenly burst open. A group of heavily armed men stormed in, their guns trained on Samantha and her lab equipment. "Everyone get down!" one of the men yelled, his voice echoing off the walls of the lab. As Emily watched in horror, Samantha stood frozen, her eyes wide with fear. What was happening? And who were these men? As the armed men stormed into the lab, Emily, Max, and Ava were forced to hit the ground, their hands over their heads. Samantha, however, remained standing, her eyes flashing with defiance. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the danger. The leader of the group, a tall, imposing man with a scar above his left eyebrow, sneered at Samantha. "We're here for the cure," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "And we're not leaving without it." Samantha's eyes narrowed. "You'll never get it," she said, her voice cold. "I've hidden it too well." The leader sneered again. "We'll see about that," he said, nodding to one of his men. The man stepped forward, a cruel smile on his face. "We have ways of making people talk," he said, his eyes glinting with sadistic pleasure. As Emily watched in horror, the man reached out and grabbed Samantha, dragging her away from the workstation. Samantha struggled and kicked, but she was no match for the man's brute strength. "Let her go!" Emily shouted, trying to scramble to her feet. But the leader turned to her, his gun trained on her head. "Stay down," he growled, "or you'll be the first to die." As Emily froze, her heart pounding in her chest, she saw Max and Ava exchange a desperate glance. They knew they had to act fast, or risk losing Samantha and the cure forever. But what could they do? They were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of options. Or were they? As Emily watched in horror, the man dragged Samantha away from the workstation, her struggles growing weaker with each passing moment. But just as all hope seemed lost, Max suddenly sprang into action. With a fierce cry, he launched himself at the leader, tackling him to the ground. Ava was right behind him, using her agility and quick thinking to take down two of the other men. Emily, inspired by her friend's bravery, joined the fight, using her knowledge of the lab to outmaneuver the remaining attackers. The battle was intense but short-lived, with the four of them emerging victorious. As they stood panting, surrounded by their defeated foes, Emily felt a surge of pride and admiration for her friends. But their celebration was short-lived, as Samantha's weak voice called out to them. "Guys, help me!" she whispered. Rushing to her side, they found her battered and bruised, but alive. With Ava's help, they managed to free her from her restraints, and she collapsed into their arms, exhausted. As they caught their breath, Emily realized that they had to get out of there, fast. The attackers might have been defeated, but there could be more on the way. With Samantha leaning heavily on Max, they made their way back to the entrance of the lab. But as they reached the door, Emily felt a sense of trepidation. What lay ahead? Would they be able to escape the city, or would they be caught again? As they stepped out into the unknown, Emily steeled herself for what was to come. They had made it this far, but their journey was far from over. As they emerged from the lab, Emily was struck by the eerie silence that surrounded them. The city was deserted, the streets empty and still. But they knew they couldn't stay there for long. They had to keep moving, to find a way out of the city before more attackers came. Samantha, still weak from her ordeal, leaned heavily on Max as they walked. Ava took the lead, scouting out the route ahead and keeping a sharp eye out for any signs of danger. As they walked, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She kept looking over her shoulder, expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. But there was never anyone there. After what felt like hours of walking, Ava finally stopped in front of a large, abandoned building. "This is it," she said, her voice low. "This is our way out of the city." Emily's heart leapt with excitement. "What is it?" she asked. Ava smiled. "It's an old subway tunnel," she said. "It runs underneath the city, all the way to the outskirts. We can use it to escape." Samantha's eyes lit up with hope. "Let's do it," she said, her voice filled with determination. As they made their way into the tunnel, Emily felt a sense of relief wash over her. They were finally going to make it out of the city. But as they walked deeper into the tunnel, the darkness seemed to press in around them. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. And then, just as they were starting to feel like they were safe, Emily heard the sound of footsteps echoing through the tunnel. They were not alone. As the sound of footsteps grew louder, Emily's heart began to pound in her chest. She exchanged a nervous glance with Ava and Max, and they all instinctively moved closer together. Samantha, still weak from her ordeal, leaned heavily on Max. "What's going on?" she whispered. "I don't know," Max replied, his voice low and tense. "But I think we're about to find out." As they rounded a corner in the tunnel, Emily saw a group of people approaching them. They were dressed in tattered clothing and looked like they had been living in the tunnel for some time. The leader of the group, a tall, gaunt man with a scruffy beard, eyed them warily. "Who are you?" he growled. Ava stepped forward, her hands held out in a calming gesture. "We're just trying to escape the city," she said. "We mean no harm." The man eyed them skeptically, but after a moment he nodded. "Okay," he said. "You can come with us. But be warned, the tunnel is not safe. There are things down here." As they followed the group deeper into the tunnel, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a nightmare. What kind of things was the man talking about? And then, just as they were starting to feel like they were getting close to the end of the tunnel, Emily heard a strange noise. It sounded like scuttling. She turned to Ava and Max, her eyes wide with fear. "What's that?" she whispered. Ava's face was pale. "I don't know," she said. "But I think we're about to find out." As the scuttling noise grew louder, Emily's heart began to pound in her chest. She could feel her breath catching in her throat, and her skin was crawling with fear. The group of people they were following suddenly stopped, their eyes fixed on something ahead. Emily followed their gaze, and what she saw made her blood run cold. A horde of twisted, humanoid creatures was emerging from the shadows, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. They were unlike anything Emily had ever seen before, and she knew that they were in grave danger. The creatures began to move towards them, their scuttling legs propelling them forward with an unnatural speed. Emily could feel the ground shaking beneath her feet as they approached. Ava grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "We have to get out of here," she whispered urgently. But it was too late. The creatures were already upon them, their twisted faces contorted in snarls. Emily felt a hand grab her shoulder, spinning her around to face one of the creatures. She looked up into its eyes, and what she saw there made her scream. The creature's eyes were not just glowing with an otherworldly light. They were also filled with a malevolent intelligence, a consciousness that seemed to be watching her with cold calculation. As Emily screamed, the creature's grip on her shoulder tightened, its fingers digging deep into her skin. She felt herself being pulled towards it, felt its hot breath washing over her face. And then, just as all hope seemed lost, a loud crash echoed through the tunnel, followed by the sound of screeching tires. The creature's grip on Emily's shoulder relaxed, and she stumbled backwards, gasping for breath. As she looked up, she saw a vehicle careening towards them, its headlights illuminating the dark tunnel. The creatures were scattering, fleeing from the oncoming vehicle. Ava grabbed Emily's arm, pulling her towards the vehicle. "Come on!" she shouted. "We have to get out of here." As they ran towards the vehicle, Emily saw that it was a large armored truck, with metal plating covering the sides and a reinforced windshield. The driver, a young woman with a determined look on her face, leaned out of the window and shouted, "Get in now!" Ava and Emily scrambled into the back of the truck, followed by Max and Samantha. The driver floored it, speeding down the tunnel as the creatures gave chase. As they careened through the tunnel, Emily held on for dear life, her knuckles white with fear. She couldn't believe what was happening. They had almost been killed by those things. But as they emerged from the tunnel into the bright sunlight, Emily felt a sense of relief wash over her. They had made it out alive. The driver, whose name was Sarah, explained that she was part of a group of survivors who had been fighting against the creatures. They had been tracking the group's movements, trying to find a way to stop them. As they drove through the deserted streets, Emily saw that the city was in ruins. Buildings were destroyed, cars were overturned, and debris littered the streets. But despite the devastation, Emily felt a sense of hope. They had found allies, and they had a chance to fight back against the creatures. As they approached the outskirts of the city, Sarah slowed down, her eyes scanning the horizon. "We're almost there," she said. "Our base is just up ahead." Emily's heart was racing with excitement. What would they find at the base? Would they be able to find a way to stop the creatures once and for all? As they crested a hill, Emily saw a large, fortified compound in the distance. It was surrounded by high walls, with guard towers at regular intervals. Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "Welcome to our home," she said. "We've been waiting for you." As they drove through the gates of the compound, Emily felt a sense of relief wash over her. They had finally found a safe haven, a place where they could rest and regroup. The compound was bustling with activity, with people of all ages and backgrounds hurrying to and fro. Emily saw gardens and farms where people were growing their own food. She saw workshops and laboratories where people were working on new technologies and medicines. Sarah led them to a large central building where they were greeted by a tall, imposing figure. He had a strong jaw and piercing blue eyes, and he looked like he had been carved out of granite. "Welcome, travelers," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "I am Marcus, the leader of this community. We've been expecting you." Emily's eyes narrowed. "Expecting us?" she repeated. Marcus smiled. "Yes. We've been tracking your progress, and we're glad you made it here safely. We have a lot to discuss, and not a lot of time to waste." As Marcus led them to a large conference room, Emily felt a sense of trepidation. What did Marcus want to discuss? And what did he mean by not a lot of time to waste? As they sat down around the conference table, Emily saw that there were several other people in the room, all of whom were staring at her with intense curiosity. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes locked on Emily's. "We've been watching you, Emily," he said. "We know all about your past and your connection to the virus, and we think you might be the key to our survival." Emily's eyes widened in shock. What did Marcus mean? And how did he know so much about her? As Emily sat in stunned silence, Marcus continued to explain. "We've been studying the virus, trying to understand how it works and how to stop it. And we've discovered that you, Emily, have a unique connection to the virus." Emily's mind was racing. What did Marcus mean by unique connection? And how did he know so much about her? Marcus leaned forward, his eyes locked on Emily's. "You see, Emily, you were one of the first people to be infected with the virus. And somehow your body was able to fight it off. We think that you may hold the key to creating a cure." Emily's eyes widened in shock. "A cure? Was it possible?" Ava spoke up, her voice filled with skepticism. "How do you know all of this?" she asked. Marcus smiled. "We've been tracking Emily's progress for some time now. We have sources who have been keeping us informed." Emily's eyes narrowed. What did Marcus mean by sources? And who were they? But before she could ask any more questions, Marcus stood up, his expression serious. "We don't have much time, Emily. The virus is spreading rapidly, and we need to act fast if we're going to have any chance of stopping it. Emily felt a surge of determination. She was ready to do whatever it took to help stop the virus. "What do I need to do?" she asked, her voice firm. Marcus smiled, a look of approval on his face. "We'll need to run some tests, see if we can understand how your body fought off the virus. And then, we'll take it from there." As Emily nodded, she felt a sense of hope that she hadn't felt in weeks. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a cure for the virus. And maybe, just maybe, they could save the world. As Emily followed Marcus and the others to the lab, she couldn't help but feel a sense of trepidation. What would these tests entail? And what would they find out about her body's response to the virus? The lab was a state-of-the-art facility, filled with all sorts of equipment and machinery. Emily was introduced to a team of scientists and doctors, who began to explain the tests they would be running. "We'll need to take some blood samples and run some scans," one of the doctors explained. "We'll also need to do some physical exams to see how your body is responding to the virus." Emily nodded, trying to stay calm. She knew that this was all necessary if they were going to find a cure. As the tests began, Emily felt a sense of relief wash over her. She was finally doing something to help, something to fight back against the virus. But as the hours passed, Emily began to feel a sense of unease. The tests were more invasive than she had expected, and she was starting to feel like a guinea pig. And then, just as she was starting to feel like she couldn't take it anymore, Marcus came into the room, a look of excitement on his face. "We've found something," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something big." Emily's heart skipped a beat. What had they found? Marcus smiled, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "We'll tell you everything," he said. "But first, we need to get you to a safe location. The lab is no longer secure." As Emily's eyes widened in alarm, Marcus grabbed her arm, pulling her out of the lab. "We have to go," he said. "Now!" As they rushed out of the lab, Emily's mind was racing with questions. What had they found? And why was the lab no longer secure? Marcus led them to a secure elevator, which took them deep beneath the compound. They emerged into a heavily fortified bunker, filled with computer screens and security monitors. "This is our emergency operations center," Marcus explained. "We can control the entire compound from here." Ava looked around, her eyes wide with amazement. "This is incredible," she said. Marcus smiled. "We've been preparing for this moment for a long time," he said. As they caught their breath, Emily turned to Marcus. "What did you find?" she asked. Marcus's expression turned serious. "We found a way to replicate the cure," he said. "But there's a catch." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "What's the catch?" she asked. Marcus hesitated. "The cure is not just a simple vaccine," he said. "It's a complex process that requires a specific genetic marker." Emily's eyes narrowed. "What genetic marker?" she asked. Marcus looked at her, his eyes locked on hers. "The genetic marker that you possess, Emily," he said. "The one that makes you immune to the virus." Emily's mind reeled as she processed the information. She was the key to the cure. But what did that mean for her? And for the rest of humanity? As Emily struggled to wrap her head around the revelation, Marcus continued to explain. "We need to harvest your genetic material, Emily," he said. "We need to replicate the marker that makes you immune." Emily's eyes widened in alarm. "Harvest my genetic material?" she repeated. "What does that mean?" Marcus hesitated. "It means we need to take some of your cells, Emily," he said. "We need to extract the genetic material from them." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. She didn't like the sound of this one bit. Ava stepped forward, her eyes flashing with anger. "You can't just take Emily's genetic material without her consent," she said. Marcus held up his hands. "We're not going to hurt Emily," he said. "We just need her help to save humanity." Emily took a deep breath, trying to process everything. She knew that she had to make a decision, and fast. But as she looked around at the faces of her friends, she knew that she couldn't do it alone. She needed their help, their support. "What do you guys think I should do?" she asked, looking at Ava, Max, and Samantha. Ava spoke up first. "We'll support you no matter what, Emily," she said. Max nodded in agreement. Yeah, we're in this together. Samantha smiled. We'll help you make the right decision, Emily. Emily felt a surge of gratitude towards her friends. She knew that she could count on them, no matter what. With newfound determination, Emily turned to Marcus. Okay, she said. I'll do it. I'll help you harvest my genetic material. Marcus smiled, relief written all over his face. Thank you, Emily, he said. Thank you for saving humanity. As Emily agreed to help, Marcus nodded and began to explain the process. We'll need to take some of your cells and extract the genetic material, he said. It's a relatively simple procedure, but it does require some specialized equipment. Emily nodded, trying to stay calm. She knew that this was a crucial step in finding a cure for the virus. Marcus led her to a small laboratory where a team of scientists were waiting. They quickly got to work, taking samples of Emily's blood and tissue. As they worked, Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. She knew that this was a risk, but she also knew that it was necessary. After what felt like hours, the scientists finally finished. They smiled and patted Emily on the back, telling her that everything had gone smoothly. Marcus came over, a look of excitement on his face. We did it, Emily, he said. We got the genetic material we needed. Emily smiled, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. That's great, she said. But as she looked around the laboratory, she noticed something strange. One of the scientists was acting suspiciously, whispering to another scientist and glancing nervously at Emily. Emily's instincts kicked in, and she felt a sense of unease. Something was not right. Marcus, what's going on? She asked, her voice low. Marcus looked at her, a confused expression on his face. What do you mean? He asked. Emily nodded towards the suspicious scientist. That guy, she said. He's acting strange. Marcus's expression changed, and he quickly walked over to the scientist. What's going on here? He asked, his voice firm. The scientist looked nervous, glancing at Emily before answering. I was just discussing the results with my colleague, he said. Marcus's eyes narrowed. I don't believe you, he said. Emily, I think we have a problem. As Marcus's words hung in the air, Emily felt a sense of unease wash over her. What was going on? And why was Marcus suddenly acting so suspicious? The scientist who had been acting strangely took a step back, his eyes darting nervously between Marcus and Emily. I didn't mean to cause any trouble, he stammered. Marcus's expression turned cold. You're not going anywhere, he growled, his voice dripping with menace. Suddenly, the laboratory was filled with the sound of alarms blaring and footsteps pounding the floor. A team of heavily armed guards burst into the room, surrounding the scientist and Marcus. What's going on? Emily demanded, her voice rising above the din. One of the guards turned to her, his expression grim. We've had a breach of security, he said. This scientist has been working with the enemy. Emily's eyes widened in shock. What enemy? She asked. The guard's expression turned even grimmer. The ones who created the virus, he said. They've been infiltrating our organization, trying to sabotage our efforts to find a cure. As Emily's mind reeled with the implications, Marcus stepped forward, his eyes blazing with determination. We're not going to let them succeed, he said. We're going to find a way to stop them, no matter what it takes. But as Emily looked around the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. The enemy was already inside, and it was only a matter of time before they struck again. As the guards took the scientist away, Emily turned to Marcus. What does this mean? She asked. Marcus's expression was grim. It means we can't trust anyone, he said. We have to assume that the enemy has infiltrated every level of our organization. Ava stepped forward, her eyes flashing with anger. We can't just sit back and do nothing, she said. We have to take action. Marcus nodded. I agree, he said. We need to gather a team of people we can trust and start investigating. We need to find out who is behind this and stop them. As they began to make plans, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were in grave danger. The enemy was powerful and ruthless, and they would stop at nothing to achieve their goals. But Emily was determined to fight back. She was determined to help find a cure for the virus and bring the enemy to justice. As they set out on their mission, Emily felt a sense of purpose that she had not felt in a long time. She was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that she was fighting for a cause that was bigger than herself. But as they delved deeper into the heart of the enemy's operation, Emily began to realize that the truth was far more sinister than she had ever imagined. The enemy was not just a group of rogue scientists. It was a powerful organization with tentacles that reached into every level of society. And Emily was about to discover that she was at the very center of their plans. As they dug deeper, Emily and her team discovered that the organization behind the virus was known as the Syndicate. It was a powerful and secretive group that had infiltrated every level of society, from governments to corporations. The Syndicate's goal was to create a new world order, with themselves at the helm. And they were using the virus to achieve their goal. Emily was horrified. She had never imagined that the enemy was so powerful and so ruthless. But she was determined to stop them. She and her team worked tirelessly to gather evidence and build a case against the Syndicate. As they got closer to the truth, Emily began to realize that she was in grave danger. The Syndicate would stop at nothing to silence her, and she knew that she had to be careful. One night, as she was working late in the lab, Emily received a mysterious message. It was a warning, telling her to back off the investigation. Emily was shaken. She knew that the Syndicate was behind the message, and she knew that she had to take it seriously. But she was not going to back down. She was determined to see justice served, no matter the cost. As she left the lab and made her way back to her quarters, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She knew that the Syndicate had eyes and ears everywhere, and she knew that she had to be careful. But she was not prepared for what happened next. As she opened the door to her quarters, she was met with a shocking sight. Ava was lying on the floor, unconscious. And standing over her was one of the Syndicate's deadliest agents. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she took in the scene before her. Ava was lying motionless on the floor, and the agent was standing over her, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Welcome, Emily," the agent said, his voice dripping with malice. "I've been waiting for you." Emily's instincts kicked in, and she quickly scanned the room for any signs of danger. She spotted a small knife on the counter and made a split-second decision. With a swift motion, Emily grabbed the knife and lunged at the agent. But he was too quick, and he easily dodged her attack. The agent retaliated with a swift punch to Emily's stomach, sending her crashing to the floor. As she struggled to catch her breath, the agent leaned in close, his hot breath on her face. "You're a foolish girl, Emily," he sneered. "You think you can take on the Syndicate and win? You're no match for us." Emily's eyes flashed with defiance, but she knew she was in grave danger. The agent was too strong, too powerful. She needed to think fast if she was going to get out of this alive. Just as the agent was about to deliver the final blow, Emily heard a loud crash from outside the room. The agent's head jerked up, and for a split second he was distracted. That was all the time Emily needed. With a surge of adrenaline, she kicked the agent in the stomach and made a run for it, dashing out of the room and slamming the door shut behind her. As she emerged into the bright lights of the corridor, Emily saw Marcus and a team of heavily armed guards rushing towards her. "Emily, are you okay?" Marcus shouted, his face etched with concern. Emily nodded, still trying to catch her breath. "Ava's inside," she gasped. "We have to get her out." Marcus nodded, and the guards rushed past Emily, bursting into the room to rescue Ava. As Emily watched, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. They had made it out alive, but she knew that the Syndicate would not give up easily. They would be back, and next time, Emily would not be so lucky. As the guards carried Ava out of the room, Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her. They had made it out alive, but she knew that the danger was far from over. Marcus turned to her, his expression grim. "We need to get out of here now," he said. "The Syndicate will not stop until they've eliminated us." Emily nodded, her heart racing with fear. She knew that Marcus was right. They had to get out of there, and fast. As they made their way through the corridors, Emily could hear the sound of alarms blaring and footsteps pounding the floor. The Syndicate's agents were closing in on them. Marcus led them to a secret exit, a hidden door that blended seamlessly into the wall. They slipped through the door and found themselves in a narrow alleyway. The alleyway was dark and deserted, the only sound the distant hum of the city. Emily felt a sense of relief wash over her. They had made it out. But as they began to make their way through the alleyway, Emily heard the sound of footsteps behind them. The syndicate's agents had found them. Marcus turned to her, his eyes locked on hers. "Run," he said. And with that they took off, sprinting down the alleyway as fast as they could. The agents were closing in on them, but Emily knew that they couldn't give up. They had to keep running. As they emerged from the alleyway, Emily saw a glimmer of hope. A car was waiting for them, the engine revving as they approached. Marcus yanked open the door and pushed Emily inside. "Get in," he shouted. And with that, they sped away from the curb, leaving the agents and the danger behind. But Emily knew that they were far from safe. The syndicate would not give up easily. They would be back, and next time, Emily would not be so lucky. As they drove through the city, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She looked over her shoulder, but saw nothing. Marcus noticed her concern and put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're safe for now," he said. "But we can't stay in one place for too long. We have to keep moving." Emily nodded, her mind racing with questions. Where would they go next? And how would they stop the syndicate? As the car sped through the night, Emily knew that she had to be brave. She had to be strong, because the fate of humanity depended on it. As they drove through the night, Emily's mind was racing with thoughts of the syndicate and their plans. She knew that they had to stop them, but she had no idea how. Marcus seemed to sense her unease and put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll figure it out, Emily," he said. "We'll find a way to stop them." Emily nodded, feeling a small sense of comfort. She knew that Marcus was right. They would find a way to stop the syndicate. As they drove, the city gave way to countryside, and the countryside gave way to a dense forest. Emily had no idea where they were going, but she trusted Marcus. After what felt like hours of driving, Marcus finally pulled over. "We're here," he said. Emily looked around, but all she saw was trees. "Where's here?" she asked. Marcus smiled. "You'll see," he said. He got out of the car and opened Emily's door. "Come on," he said. Emily got out of the car and followed Marcus through the trees. They walked for a few minutes, and then Emily saw a clearing up ahead. In the center of the clearing was a small cabin. Smoke was rising from the chimney, and Emily could see a light on inside. Marcus led her to the cabin and opened the door. "Welcome to our hideout," he said. Emily's eyes widened as she looked around. The cabin was small, but it was cozy. There was a fire burning in the fireplace, and a small kitchenette in the corner. Ava was sitting on the couch, looking pale but alive. "Hey, Emily," she said, smiling weakly. Emily rushed over to her and hugged her tightly. "I'm so glad you're okay," she said. Ava smiled and hugged her back. "I'm glad you're okay too," she said. As they hugged, Emily felt a sense of relief wash over her. They were safe, at least for now, and they had each other. But as she looked around the cabin, Emily knew that they couldn't stay hidden forever. They had to come up with a plan to stop the syndicate, and they had to do it fast. "Marcus, what's the plan?" Emily asked, turning to him. Marcus's expression turned serious. "We need to gather more information about the syndicate," he said. "We need to know their plans, their weaknesses, and then we can come up with a plan to stop them." Emily nodded, her mind racing with thoughts of the syndicate and their plans. She knew that it wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to fight. "Let's do it," she said, determination in her voice. Marcus nodded, a small smile on his face. "I knew I could count on you, Emily," he said. Ava stood up, her eyes shining with determination. "I'm in too," she said. "We'll stop the syndicate, no matter what it takes." Marcus's smile grew wider. "I knew you two would be on board," he said. "Now, let's get to work." He led them to a small room in the back of the cabin, filled with computers and surveillance equipment. "This is our command center," he said. "We'll use it to gather intelligence and track the syndicate's movements." Emily's eyes widened as she looked around the room. "This is amazing," she said. "How did you set all this up?" Marcus shrugged. "I have my ways," he said. "Now, let's get to work." They spent the rest of the day gathering intelligence and tracking the syndicate's movements. Emily was amazed at how much information they were able to gather, and how quickly they were able to piece together the puzzle. As the sun began to set, Marcus leaned back in his chair and let out a sigh. "We've made some good progress today," he said, "but we still have a long way to go." Emily nodded, her eyes scanning the screens in front of her. "I think I've found something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus and Ava turned to her, their eyes locked on hers. "What is it?" Marcus asked. Emily's heart was racing as she turned to face them. "I think I've found the location of the syndicate's headquarters," she said. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Where is it?" he asked. Emily took a deep breath before answering. "It's in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city," she said. Marcus nodded, a plan already forming in his mind. "We'll leave at dawn," he said. "We'll take out the syndicate once and for all." Emily felt a surge of adrenaline as she nodded in agreement. She was ready to face whatever dangers lay ahead, knowing that she was fighting for a cause that was bigger than herself. As the sun began to rise the next morning, Emily, Marcus, and Ava set out on their mission to take down the syndicate. They were armed with guns, knives, and a fierce determination to bring an end to the organization's evil plans. As they approached the abandoned warehouse, Emily's heart was racing with anticipation. She knew that this was it. This was their chance to finally stop the syndicate and save the world. Marcus motioned for them to stop, and they crouched behind a nearby dumpster, surveying the area. The warehouse loomed before them, its broken windows and crumbling walls a testament to its abandonment. But Emily knew that the syndicate was not to be underestimated. They were a powerful and ruthless organization, and they would stop at nothing to achieve their goals. As they watched, a group of heavily armed guards emerged from the warehouse, their eyes scanning the surrounding area. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she realized that they had been spotted. Marcus motioned for them to follow him, and they crept around the side of the warehouse, trying to stay out of sight. But as they turned the corner, Emily saw something that made her blood run cold. Ava was standing in front of the warehouse, her hands raised in surrender. And standing behind her, a cruel smile spreading across his face, was the leader of the syndicate. "Welcome, Emily," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "I've been waiting for you." Emily's heart sank as she saw Ava standing in front of the warehouse, surrounded by the syndicate's guards. She knew that she had to act fast, or risk losing her friend forever. Without hesitation, Emily charged forward, her gun drawn. "Let her go!" she shouted, her voice echoing off the walls of the warehouse. The leader of the syndicate sneered at her, his eyes glinting with amusement. "You think you can save her?" he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're just a foolish little girl playing at being a hero." Emily's anger flared, and she took a step forward, her gun trained on the syndicate's leader. "I'm not playing at being a hero," she said, her voice steady. "I'm the real deal." The leader of the syndicate laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. "We'll see about that," he said, and with a flick of his wrist, he signaled to his guards. The guards moved forward, their guns drawn, and Emily knew that she was in grave danger. But she refused to back down, refused to give up. With a fierce determination, Emily charged forward, her gun blazing. She took down the guards one by one, her aim true and steady. But just as she thought she had the upper hand, the syndicate's leader pulled out a surprise of his own. A figure emerged from the shadows, a figure that Emily knew all too well. It was her long-lost brother, thought to have been killed in the virus outbreak. But now he was standing in front of her, his eyes cold and hard. "Hello, sister," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "I've been waiting for you." Emily's eyes widened in shock as she stared at her brother. She had thought he was dead, and yet here he was, standing in front of her, his eyes filled with hatred. "Brother?" she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Her brother sneered at her. "Don't call me that," he spat. "I'm not your brother anymore. I'm something more." Emily's mind was reeling. What had happened to her brother? How had he ended up working for the syndicate? The leader of the syndicate stepped forward, a smile spreading across his face. "You see, Emily, your brother here has been enhanced," he said. "He's been given the gift of the virus, and now he's one of us." Emily's eyes widened in horror as she stared at her brother. He had been infected with the virus? And now he was working for the syndicate? She felt a wave of grief wash over her. Her brother was gone, lost to the virus. And now, he was a monster, a creature driven by hatred and a desire for destruction. The leader of the syndicate laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. "You should be proud of your brother, Emily," he said. "He's become something truly remarkable." Emily's anger flared, and she took a step forward, her gun trained on the syndicate's leader. "You're not going to get away with this," she said, her voice steady. "I'm going to stop you no matter what it takes." The leader of the syndicate sneered at her, but Emily could see a flicker of fear in his eyes. He knew that she was a force to be reckoned with, and he knew that she would stop at nothing to save her brother and destroy the syndicate. With a fierce determination, Emily charged forward, her gun blazing. She took down the syndicate's guards one by one, her aim true and steady. But as she fought her way through the warehouse, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was getting closer to something. Something big. She burst through a door and found herself in a large laboratory. The room was filled with rows of workstations, each one cluttered with equipment and computers. At the far end of the room, Emily saw a large glass container. Inside the container was a figure, suspended in a liquid-filled tube. As Emily approached the container, she realized with a start that the figure inside was her brother. He was alive, but he was trapped, suspended in a state of suspended animation. The leader of the syndicate appeared beside her, a smile spreading across his face. "You're just in time to see the final stage of our plan," he said. Emily's eyes narrowed. "What plan?" she demanded. The leader of the syndicate chuckled. "Why, the plan to create a new world order, of course," he said. "With your brother as our key to unlocking the secrets of the virus." Emily's anger flared, and she raised her gun, pointing it at the syndicate's leader. "You're not going to use my brother for your twisted plans," she said. But as she pulled the trigger, Emily realized that something was wrong. The gun didn't fire. And as she looked down, she saw that it was because her brother was standing right behind her, a look of cold, hard hatred in his eyes. Emily's eyes widened in shock as she stared at her brother. She had thought he was trapped in the container, but somehow he had escaped. "Brother," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. But her brother didn't respond. Instead, he reached out and grabbed her, his grip like a vice. Emily struggled to break free, but her brother was too strong. He dragged her across the room, throwing her into a nearby chair. As Emily looked up, she saw the syndicate's leader standing over her, a smile spreading across his face. "You see, Emily, your brother is now one of us," he said. "He's been enhanced, just like the others." Emily's eyes widened in horror as she stared at her brother. He was one of them now, a mindless drone controlled by the syndicate. The leader of the syndicate leaned forward, his eyes glinting with excitement. "And now, Emily, it's your turn," he said. "You're going to be enhanced, just like your brother." Emily's heart was racing with fear as she realized what was happening. She was going to be turned into one of the syndicate's mindless drones, forced to do their bidding. But Emily refused to give up. She knew that she had to fight back, no matter what. She looked around the room, desperate for a way to escape. And then she saw it. A small ventilation shaft in the wall, partially hidden by a nearby console. It was her only chance. With a surge of adrenaline, Emily made a break for the ventilation shaft. She dove into the narrow opening, her heart pounding in her chest. As she crawled through the shaft, Emily could hear the syndicate's leader shouting behind her. "Get her!" he yelled. "Don't let her escape." But Emily didn't look back. She kept crawling, her eyes fixed on the vent cover ahead. She knew that she had to get out of there, no matter what. Finally, Emily saw a glimmer of light ahead. She pushed the vent cover open and dropped down to the floor, gasping for breath. As she looked around, Emily realized that she was in some kind of abandoned factory. The room was dimly lit, the only sound the creaking of old machinery. But Emily didn't have time to think. She knew that the syndicate would be after her, and she had to get out of there fast. With a surge of adrenaline, Emily took off, sprinting across the room. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew that she had to keep moving. As she ran, Emily could hear the sound of footsteps behind her. The syndicate's agents were closing in. But Emily refused to give up. She kept running, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that she had to escape no matter what. And then, just as she thought she was going to collapse from exhaustion, Emily saw a glimmer of light ahead. It was a door partially hidden by a stack of crates. With a surge of hope, Emily sprinted towards the door. She burst through it, slamming it shut behind her. As she leaned against the door, gasping for breath, Emily realized that she had made it. She had escaped from the syndicate. But as she looked around, Emily realized that she was not alone. There was someone else in the room, someone who had been watching her. And as Emily turned to face them, she saw a figure that made her heart skip a beat. It was a woman with long, flowing hair and piercing green eyes. "Welcome, Emily," the woman said, her voice low and husky. "I've been waiting for you." Emily's eyes narrowed as she stared at the woman. "Who are you?" she demanded. The woman smiled, her eyes glinting with amusement. "My name is Ariana," she said, "and I'm here to help you." Emily's eyes widened in surprise. "Help me," she repeated. "How?" Ariana stepped forward, her movements fluid and graceful. "I have information about the syndicate," she said. "Information that can help you take them down." Emily's heart was racing with excitement. She had been searching for a way to stop the syndicate for so long, and now, finally, she had a lead. "What kind of information?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ariana smiled again. "I have access to the syndicate's internal systems," she said. "I can give you the location of their headquarters, the names of their top agents, and the details of their plans." Emily's eyes widened in amazement. This was the break she had been waiting for. "Okay," she said, her voice firm. "I'm in. What's the plan?" Ariana nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "We'll need to move quickly," she said. "The syndicate will stop at nothing to achieve their goals." Emily nodded, her heart pounding with excitement. She was ready to take on the syndicate, and with Ariana's help, she knew she could do it. Together, the two women set out on their mission to take down the syndicate. They moved swiftly and silently, using Ariana's information to evade the syndicate's agents and stay one step ahead. As they fought their way through the city, Emily realized that she had found a true ally in Ariana. The woman was tough, resourceful, and determined, and together, they made a formidable team. But as they neared the syndicate's headquarters, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. The syndicate was notorious for its ruthless tactics, and Emily knew that they would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. "Ariana, I have a bad feeling about this," Emily said, her voice low and urgent. Ariana turned to her, her eyes narrowing. "What is it?" she asked. Emily hesitated, unsure of how to explain her intuition. "I just feel like we're walking into a trap," she said finally. Ariana's expression turned grim. "We'll be careful," she said. "But we can't back down now. We have to see this through." Emily nodded, her heart pounding with anticipation. She knew that they were taking a risk, but she also knew that they had to try. Together, the two women crept forward, their guns drawn and their senses on high alert. They were ready for whatever lay ahead, and they were determined to take down the syndicate once and for all. As they approached the syndicate's headquarters, Emily and Ariana could feel the tension building. They knew that they were taking a huge risk by infiltrating the enemy's lair, but they were determined to see it through. They snuck past the guards and made their way deep into the complex, avoiding detection by mere seconds. Finally, they reached the heart of the headquarters, the control room. Inside, they found the leader of the syndicate, surrounded by his top agents. Emily's eyes locked onto the leader, her gun trained on him. "You're finished," she said, her voice cold and steady. The leader sneered at her, but Emily could see the fear lurking behind his eyes. He knew that he was beaten. But just as Emily was about to pull the trigger, Ariana grabbed her arm. "Wait," she said. "We need to know what they're planning." Emily hesitated, her fingers still poised on the trigger. But then she nodded, and together, they began to interrogate the syndicate's leader. At first, he refused to talk, But Emily and Ariana were relentless. They used every trick in the book to extract information from him, and finally he cracked. "The plan is to release a new strain of the virus," he said, his voice shaking with fear. "One that will spread even faster and be even more deadly." Emily's eyes widened in horror. "Where is the virus?" she demanded. The leader hesitated, but then he told them. "It's in a lab on the outskirts of the city," he said. "But you'll never make it in time. The release is scheduled for tonight." Emily and Ariana exchanged a look, and then they sprang into action. They knew that they had to stop the release of the virus, no matter what it took. With the syndicate's leader in tow, they set out for the lab, racing against time to prevent a catastrophe. But as they arrived, they were met with a surprise. The lab was surrounded by the syndicate's agents, and they were not going to let Emily and Ariana get in the way. Emily and Ariana exchanged a look, and then they charged forward, guns blazing. They fought their way through the syndicate's agents, taking down anyone who got in their way. As they approached the lab, Emily could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that they were running out of time, and that they had to stop the release of the virus before it was too late. They burst into the lab, guns drawn, and Emily's eyes scanned the room frantically. She saw a group of scientists huddled around a computer, their faces tense with concentration. "Stop!" Emily shouted, her gun trained on the scientists. "You can't release the virus." The scientists turned to face her, their eyes wide with fear. "We have to," one of them said, his voice shaking. "We've been ordered to." Emily's eyes narrowed. "By who?" she demanded. The scientist hesitated, and then he spoke. "By the leader of the syndicate," he said. "He's been controlling us all along." Emily's anger flared, and she took a step forward. "You're not going to release the virus," she said. "Not while I'm still breathing." Ariana stepped forward, her gun trained on the scientists. "We're not going to let you do it," she said. The scientists looked at each other nervously, and then they nodded. "Okay," one of them said. "We won't release the virus." Emily's eyes narrowed. "Good," she said. "Now let's get out of here." As they turned to leave, Emily's phone rang. She answered it, and a voice spoke on the other end. "Emily," the voice said. "It's Marcus. I've been tracking the syndicate's movements, and I think I've found their secret headquarters." Emily's eyes widened. "Where is it?" she asked. Marcus told her, and Emily's eyes locked onto Ariana's. "We have to go," she said. Ariana nodded, and together, they set out for the syndicate's secret headquarters. They were determined to take down the organization once and for all, and they were willing to risk everything to do it. As they approached the syndicate's secret headquarters, Emily and Ariana could feel the tension building. They knew that they were taking a huge risk by infiltrating the enemy's lair, but they were determined to see it through. They snuck past the guards and made their way deep into the complex, avoiding detection by mere seconds. Finally, they reached the heart of the headquarters, the control room. Inside, they found the leader of the syndicate, surrounded by his top agents. Emily's eyes locked onto the leader, her gun trained on him. "You're finished," she said, her voice cold and steady. The leader sneered at her, but Emily could see the fear lurking behind his eyes. He knew that he was beaten. But just as Emily was about to pull the trigger, Ariana grabbed her arm. "Wait," she said. "We need to know the truth." Emily hesitated, her fingers still poised on the trigger. But then she nodded, and together, they began to interrogate the syndicate's leader. "Why did you create the virus?" Emily demanded. The leader smiled, a cold, calculating smile. "We created the virus to control the population," he said. "To thin out the herd, so to speak." Emily's eyes widened in horror. "You're monsters," she said. The leader shrugged. "We're just trying to survive," he said. "In a world that's rapidly becoming overpopulated." Ariana's eyes narrowed. "But at what cost?" she asked. The leader smiled again. "At any cost," he said. Emily's anger flared, and she took a step forward. "You're not going to get away with this," she said. But just as she was about to pull the trigger, the leader's eyes flicked to something behind her. Emily turned to see what it was, and her heart sank. It was her brother, standing in the doorway with a look of cold, hard hatred in his eyes. "Emily," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "I've been waiting for you." Emily's eyes widened in shock as she stared at her brother. She had thought she had lost him forever, but now he was standing in front of her, his eyes filled with hatred. "Brother," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Her brother sneered at her. "You're so weak, Emily," he said. "You always were. But I've been made stronger. I've been enhanced." Emily's eyes narrowed. "What have they done to you?" she demanded. Her brother smiled, a cold, calculating smile. "They've given me the gift of the virus," he said. "And now I'm one of them." Emily's heart sank. She knew that she had to save her brother, but she also knew that it wouldn't be easy. Ariana stepped forward, her gun trained on Emily's brother. "We can't let you hurt anyone else," she said. Emily's brother laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. "You can't stop me," he said. "I'm too powerful." And with that, he charged at Ariana, his eyes blazing with hatred. Emily knew that she had to act fast, or risk losing her brother forever. She launched herself at her brother, tackling him to the ground. They rolled around, punching and kicking, as Ariana tried to intervene. But Emily's brother was too strong. He threw her off and stood up, his eyes blazing with hatred. "You're just like them," Emily said, her voice shaking with emotion. "You're just like the Syndicate." Her brother sneered at her. "I'm better than them," he said. "I'm the future." And with that, he turned and ran, disappearing into the shadows. Emily was left standing alone, her heart heavy with grief. She knew that she had lost her brother, at least for now. But she also knew that she couldn't give up. She had to keep fighting, no matter what. Ariana put a hand on her shoulder. "We'll get him back," she said. "We'll save him." Emily nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "We have to," she said. "We can't let him become one of them." Emily and Ariana searched the area, but Emily's brother was nowhere to be found. They knew that they had to act fast, before he could cause any more harm. As they searched, Emily's mind was racing. She couldn't believe that her own brother had turned against her. She felt a deep sense of loss and betrayal. Ariana put a hand on her shoulder. "We'll get him back," she said. "We'll save him." Emily nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling of doubt. Had she lost her brother forever? Just then Emily's phone rang. She answered it, and a voice spoke on the other end. "Emily," the voice said. "It's Marcus. I've been tracking your brother's movements. I think I know where he's headed." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "Where?" she asked. "The old warehouse on the outskirts of town," Marcus said. "Be careful, Emily. Your brother is not the only one who will be there." Emily's eyes locked onto Ariana's. "Let's go," she said. Ariana nodded, and together, they set out for the old warehouse. They knew that they were taking a risk, but they were determined to save Emily's brother and stop the Syndicate once and for all. As they approached the warehouse, Emily could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that this was it. This was the final showdown. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. And then, with Ariana by her side, she stepped into the warehouse, ready to face whatever lay ahead.